Hayden, in a church world, many senior pastors tend to be boomers and Gen Xers. And when I hear them talk about leading millennials and Gen Z, they're more likely to talk about the challenges rather than the opportunities. And I'm just wondering, is that typical? Is that a typical pattern when older generations are hiring and then trying to empower younger generations? Or is there something unique about the current mix of generations in the workplace?
Yes. To both those questions, the answer is yes.
Let's start with the first one then.
Okay.
Is it common?
I have, so basically, over the last 15 years, I've spent half of my career chatting with organizations that are seeing the other generations as a challenge rather than an opportunity. The
Yeah.
OK Boomer Have a Terrible Day t-shirt that Gen Z launched before COVID and that ended up with a billion downloads. Not just t-shirts sold, but a billion downloads in 3 weeks. That was
My
not
goodness.
I see working with older employees as an opportunity. And so we tend to see the other generations through their challenges. Even more than that, Ronstadt discovered in their World of Work survey that the average generation, that the average person spends 40 minutes a week with a different generation outside of things that the job imposes. Your workspace is next to them. You're in a meeting. That we just don't hang out with people of a different generation because of the inherent challenges of the age gap. We have names for people who date other generations. They're not positive names. Cradle robber and cougar. They're not necessarily positive names, and so as a result, the challenges tend to overweigh the opportunities. And I think if we could paraphrase Jesus with this one, but not so with you. Coming into the church means we have to quit privileging one generation over another, and but that adds a much greater complexity to it all, and especially in the world of mentoring and preparing the next generation of leaders, that is an intergenerational sport.
Right. That's right. Well, it does seem that I don't know, I'm remembering back when I was new into the workplace, and I'm part of Gen X.
Love you, Gen Xers. You're so small, so we have to give you extra love.
But I don't know if you remember this. I do. 20, 30 years ago, they referred to us as the slacker generation because apparently we didn't like to work hard. We didn't have a good work ethic. I don't know what
No, you all wouldn't show up for career days. IBM was paying a lot of money to business schools to feed them graduates. And the Xers didn't want to go work in large corporations. They wanted to do startups. And so two people would show up for career day and IBM was threatening to pull some of their funding. So business professors literally made Xers attend it as a criteria of graduating their class.
Well, contributing to this, I think it does seem that there are these generational stereotypes that I think actually
like you Xers are slackers.
That's right, and I think that those tend to become barriers then to healthy intergenerational dynamics on teams. Do you agree with that?
Oh, you bet, because those snowflake millennials can't handle a conversation. How's that for a stereotype? That doesn't do us any good.
It doesn't.
Yeah,
and
boomers, arrogant meat generation boomers that really don't care about anybody but themselves and put everybody in a box. How am I doing, Tony?
Well, I appreciate your sarcasm, but yeah, as an example, that snowflake label on millennials, I have two millennials in my household or in my family, and they are the furthest thing from snowflakes. But it's an example though of when we put those stereotypes on the entire generation. I don't know that that's helpful for us.
In the book I wrote called Sticking Points, I talk about the difference between statistical models and stereotypes. When we take what is statistically valid over a large group of people and apply it to any one person, we take what is a generalization statistically and we make it a stereotype. And that's immoral, and even worse, it's ignorant. It just isn't true. And so it doesn't do us any good. And so we have to be curious. Be curious, my friend. Stay curious about our generalizations so that, one, we don't over apply them to an individual where they don't apply. But even more than that, we say, I wonder if I heard that somewhere, or I've noticed 3 or 4 people that fit that, and I've made that into a small data pool generalization. I ought to stay curious about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons I think that people who have Gen Z and millennial family members or associates they've worked with, that they've been close with, or volunteered together, often find it easier to work with them because they've already busted through some of those stereotypes by seeing data points that don't match some of the silliness.
That's right. All right. So, Haydn, here's what I'm seeing in the churches that I'm working with, and maybe through your experience, it sounds like you actually have some connections to the church world in your family as well from the past.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're hearing is many churches are struggling attracting younger staff and younger leaders. And so, do you sense that we need to approach how we recruit and hire the next generations differently than maybe we have in the past?
Oh, undoubtedly. And it is much harder than those of us who are older think it should be. And I don't know, Tony, if you or your listeners are like me, but I don't like things that I think are harder than they should be. I tend to fuss or whine about things that I think are harder than they should be. So I occasionally give groups 5 minutes just to shake it off, just take the next 5 minutes and pout it out. The reality isn't going to change, and it is harder than you think it should be. It's harder than it was with you. And I think that's one of the discontinuities, is it's harder than it was for the people who hired them. And so it shouldn't be that hard for me. It's not fair if I have to work a lot harder to hire younger people than the people who hired me. It's not fair. And you're right. So I don't know if we want to take 5 minutes of this for people to be able to pout it out. But go ahead and take that when you're done listening to the podcast. Just take 5 minutes, set a timer, and just pout about it. It's okay. And then we can come back and face reality.
So what do you think then, some of the specifics of recruiting these younger generations? What are some things that we might have to do differently going forward?
You bet. So let me give you 3 big discontinuities. And, you can, anybody who's a big Lau Schaller fan can hear so much Lau Schaller pop through my language. Discontinuity was one of his big words. And book titles. Anyway, one of them is they are much less patient much less patient in general. And so I knew if I could outlast, to quote, when Arlo Guthrie became a Christian, to quote his album Outlasting the Blues, if I could outlast the blues, if I could outlast my boss, I could eventually lead. And we didn't have to see eye to eye. We didn't have to agree to it. I had to nod and kind of do what they wanted, and then also go do my own thing as much as I could before I got reined back in. That was a dynamic I was used to. There was a lot of independence. Independence was expected. What I hear most from Gen X managers is, wow, millennials and Gen Zs want a lot of conversation and attention. And here's what they say. If I had time to find the letter as a sample, I could have adjusted the letter and sent it off and wouldn't need to assign it to you. So go figure out, go look online, go figure out, go ask a friend. I don't care. Go figure out how to send a letter to the parents of the students about the change we're going to make in the program next week. But here's a generation that always had a rubric and could always go online and find examples. And you go on Glassdoor, and every manager they liked was someone who they saw as helpful and as a coach. And Gen X, who had the most part-time jobs, right? The most independence of all generations. Gen X is like, go figure it out. I had to figure it out. You go figure it out. And younger generations like, my boss doesn't care. And actually, they're kind of a horrible manager. So I hear so many Gen Xers in churches being called horrible managers, when often it's because they don't understand the expectation to provide provide additional help. So there's big expectations. Secondly, connectivity is a big deal. I was doing a session with on the nines, and one of the, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, the topic was reaching millennials, and a younger person they brought in said, "You've got to give access to your younger staff." And I listened for a while, and I said, "Well, hey, from a church growth standpoint, the absolute best way to wreak havoc in a staff is to have a senior minister meeting individually or even with younger staff people and undercutting the entire chain of command." Now, that has not changed. I think with the phrase pour over, we just never said that, but I'm looking for an older person who will pour into me. And pour over. Can you tell I'm a coffee person, yes. Tony? Pour into is the phrase that has become maybe the phrase of younger church people. I'm looking for someone to pour into me. Well, we were thinking a half-hour meeting with our boss was all the pouring into we wanted, and in many cases, whereas now it's, how do I get access to the leaders? So at least every 3 weeks, if not every 2 weeks, the senior leader, even in a large church, meets with millennial and Gen Z staff and answers questions with some handlers there so they do not undercut the chain of command. Because staff will ask questions they got to know from their boss to try to get a yes from the senior minister, because that's how human beings roll. And that's got to be stopped. But giving access in a planned way allows for people to feel like they're in the know. And this has been well documented in the business world, but it's one of the things that churches has probably not done specifically enough. When they do it, they then get burned because people ask questions that are not really appropriate and not helpful, that are chain of command questions. And having a way to work that through makes a big difference. So just one practical idea of what's got to be necessary. And then lastly, a lot more support than older generations were given. Just a lot more emotional support. I was working with a huge missions agency. And so they're out on the field with an Xer, and they're like, they call home 3 times a week. I skip my sabbatical because we ought to be out here in the field. That's what we signed up for, right? I don't need to come home. And so when people are like, not only do I want to come home more often than the policy has been in the past, but I call my friends at home 3 nights a week. And for them, they're like, you're just emotional wrecks. Whereas they're just, they would see it as emotionally far more connected. Mm-hmm. Even Francis Schaeffer's Labrie talked about how millennials aren't as interested in philosophical conversations as they are conversations about relationships. And so when those of us who are older are like kind of a hands off, most of the time I spend, and the limited time I spend coaching churches, most of the time is coaching people to have a more robust managerial mentoring relationship with younger staff so that they stay.
I love that. And what's interesting, and in fact, I was just having this conversation with a pastor yesterday, is it used to be way back when, and again, I'm recalling the early days of my roles in the marketplace and then in ministry, we saw our bosses as kind of the providing the coaching and the development so that we could perform our jobs better. And what's interesting is now, in addition to doing that for the people that serve on our teams, we're also providing counseling, coaching on emotional, relational, mental health issues. And for, I think, a lot of boomer pastors in particular, they're thinking, I didn't sign up for this. This is not what I signed up to do. But it's the reality of not just church teams. It's the reality of just the workforce in general right now. We can't just be managing for performance. We need to be managing more holistically the overall health of the people that are serving on our teams.
One of the books I wrote was about generations in churches. The other book is just generations in general, and it's more business focused. And in that book, so I added Gen Z to it now a couple of years ago. And one of the differences with the Gen Z, when you compare them, is for Gen Z, I think you're a good manager if you care about me more than you care about hitting your goals.
Yeah.
And for them, coaching is equal sign to management. Whereas in the past, it's been, hey, be a good manager. If you're a good coach, that's a nice bonus. For Gen Z, management equals coaching, mic drop. There is no more to that conversation. If you're not a good coach, then you're just the person that approves my vacation and assigns work tasks. And so I can't emphasize that more. That is, not everything with Gen Z has been hit by multiple surveys. This is the one thing that has come up again and again is they see coaching as the management role. So let me go on another little rant here. I think the biggest challenge with us being able to create leaders of a new generation is management expectations. I already mentioned that they're very high expectations. Traditionalists did not have high expectations of me. They were grateful to get a youth minister as bad as I was, right? When I started out going to seminary, working as a slightly barely paid youth minister, right? And they were happy. They were very happy to get access. They were grateful. There were a couple critics, but most of the people were supportive even when they weren't happy with everything. They had very low expectations and high gratitude. Boomers had higher expectations. Xers have higher expectations. And millennials as parents have very high expectations of churches, for example. But all of that has meant the expectations on staff have gone way up. That's one of the biggest discontinuities. And so there's far more conversations about handling the emotional pressure of the work demands. It was not as emotionally demanding. There were more opportunities to fail or not succeed, right? And even in smaller churches, the demands are higher. And the demands on leaders as managers are way up. If I could do anything now that I've left Frank and Covey and I'm now working on my own, if I could do anything for churches, it would be just to teach management, to teach the kind of management basics and management, not for the marketplace, but management that churches need. It's slightly different. And anybody who's left the marketplace like you did knows there's a few things that are different enough that it just doesn't work right because the currencies are different. It just doesn't work right in churches. So there's 75% of business management works, 25% will kill you. And so that's what I would love to do. I don't know that I can make a living at it, but that's what I would love to do because so many of us, that's just not what we've had training in or conversations about because the management expectation is a fairly new thing. The boomers really did bring it along. So it's new. We only had a couple of decades to begin to figure out management in churches.
Well, Haydn, there's definitely a handoff of leadership that is beginning to happen in churches, and the boomers are passing on leadership to the younger generations, and finally, millennials are specifically are getting the opportunity to step into key leadership roles in churches. And so maybe a little bit of coaching first for the boomers and then for the millennials about how leaders in both of these generations can kind of prepare for the handoff to happen and for the handoff to be successful. Any coaching for either the boomers that are handing off leadership or millennials preparing for leadership?
You bet. First one is don't expect them to lead the way you do. Family businesses find this to be the case. I really worry about my kids. I worry that they won't call. You just have to pick up the phone. And there's some truth to that when you're working with older vendors or a guy who runs a big construction company. It's like, my son won't call and make sure they're going to be there on Thursday. He sends a text and then they don't come. His dad was right. With some of the older vendors, he needed to call. And but they're going to do it differently than you. The questions that get asked, I'd love to spend some time just talking about the questions that millennials think their churches don't talk about, that all of their friends that don't go to church talk about. And so they're going to talk about different things. They're going to emphasize different things. And they're going to do it differently than you. And so that'd be the first thing. And for millennials, the things you want to do that are different, you may not have enough money for yet. I was coaching somebody that was complaining about the church I attend. And they're like, this and this, and we ought to do this, we ought to do that. And I just smiled and said, I would never stay for that. I said, I would go to a different church if we started doing what you're wanting to do. I said, I'm not that. I understand what you're saying, but the people who give most of the money would not accept that big of a jump. You're going to have to go start something if you really want to do that right now. But you don't have to be patient, but you also won't get funding for that. So when the leaders keep telling you no, then that's a good thing, because they know that they would have to let you go when there wasn't money to pay you for doing the thing you believe they have to do right now. And I would also say to millennials, because I've had this conversation with my children who are in ministry, when your church, when your leaders ask you what ideas you have for reaching millennials, give them a few of those ideas. And when they realize it would be too big of a shift, and it may take 5 or 6 years to implement most of that, they're not ignoring you. They're simply saying, oh, okay, no, we can't do that. And you're thinking, well, they asked me and now they don't care. They asked you and they realized that it would sink the ship. And those things take a while to change. Churches and nonprofit religious organizations change slowly. And patience is a virtue. As a matter of fact, as I've coached younger people in ministry, if you're a person that can walk a group through change, you will never have to worry about finding a place to serve. People who can walk through intergenerational change are incredibly valuable. So be patient, be curious, and also be patient, my friend. That'd be my advice to people who are younger. Just be patient. They meant what they said, and then you scared them to death when you told them everything that would have to change.
Haydn, why don't we finish here then? Because I'd love to hear your perspective as we start to shift and the new younger generations take on leadership, especially in the church. How do you think organizations will look different going forward into the future?
Organizations in general, or churches and religious nonprofits specifically?
Either one. Yeah, I'd love to have your perspective on both of those.
Well, I think COVID has accelerated dramatically what organizations were going to look like already. So much greater flexibility in when people work and where they work. Much greater flexibility. And now that people are living longer, for example, one of the things I talk about in the religious book, Generational IQ, is how older generations, when they retire, still want to be involved in churches, but they also want to take 3 months off and go live with their grandkids after they have a baby. And so we're like, hey, we need these valuable people to run ministries like they did when I was coming up through the ranks. No, they want to run it for 3 months and then be gone for 3 months. They'll cycle in and out just like they do when they come in the workforce. They take a consulting gig and they go take 6 months off and then they take another consulting gig. It's not the same kind of stay in place retirement that we're used to. So the flexibility is the organization of the future. The ability to be able to collaborate across different boundaries quickly is also a hallmark of that. And lastly, the whole sensitivity to mental and emotional challenges, mental illness, the classic category for it. You know, if the millennials brought topics of sexuality out of the closet, Gen Z is bringing mental health out of the closet. That is, even in 2015, 50% of college freshmen in the big UCLA freshman survey said they were going to use counseling resources of their universities, and universities started freaking out and quadrupling and double quadrupling their counseling centers because, you know, when your state university and 40,000 students and 20,000 of them tell they're going to use counseling services, you've got problems with intake. And so when we talked earlier about the supportiveness that newer generations want, it comes along with this international discussion you referenced, Tony, about mental health and what that means. And because of the greater demands on people, mental stress is higher. And so we're going to, you know, we all know that sermons about pastoral issues play better, right? It may go a little better than a series through Leviticus, for example, in terms of just what people get download recordings of. But that becomes part of the way the organization changes and the way we interact with staff as well. And so That's part of the ongoing conversation. And I think younger generations will go, hey, I have to figure out how to earn a living despite how I feel. That's what happens when you move out of the emerging adult life stage into the next couple of life stages. So everybody goes through that, but that'll be an ongoing changing part of the conversation. And then lastly, we are up against a world where conversations of the intellectual nature. Gen X is known for their activism. They were not big on intellectual conversations. And a lot of Gen X pastors are still not having intellectual conversations because that's not what matters to them. To them, Christianity is proving it by what you do. But the younger two generations are having a big drop off, even in belief. The number of people who don't believe, who are atheists or agnostics, is increasing. And it's a growing indication that the next generations in churches will be having a lot more conversations around why this is viable, why it's intellectually credible that a person would be a part of faith. And lastly, I think you'll have churches on different corners of the same denomination who have different political orientations. You will have the conservative Southern Baptist Church. You will have the moderate Conservative Baptist Church, just like there are now progressive Baptist churches, but just within what we would see as the more conservative ranks. You'll see variations of that. And millennials and Gen Z will be leading the way of people who would be in that moderate camp. There's still 25% of them who are quite conservative. But the larger percentage of evangelical, if you want to use that label, tend to be on the more moderate side of things. So I think that'll be the last thing. We'll see churches crystallize their political differences. They'll get the reputation, and that'll be a whole new thing to sort through for younger leaders. Thank you, COVID.
Yes, that's right. And Haydn, thank you for joining us for this conversation about generations, not only engaging on our teams in the churches, but also just your perspective on future generations and what that's going to mean for the church as well. So thank you for joining us for today's conversation.
Thanks for having me, Tony.